Welcome to another episode of Who's There? Horror Stories and Reports. The supernatural journey of a trucker. Life on the road has always been my most faithful companion. For decades, I've crossed the vast expanses of America, from Montana to the farthest reaches of the country, with only the rumble of the engine and the endless asphalt as constants. At 60 years old, I, Marcus, thought I had seen it all in this solitary but rewarding profession. Little did I know that the true challenge to my perception of reality was about to begin, defying everything I believed possible in this world. My father-in-law, Rodrigo, became an unexpected but welcome presence on my trips during the last years of his life. Our relationship, initially marked by tensions, blossomed into a genuine friendship during the long hours shared in the cabin of my truck. Rodrigo was a simple man, but his stories were a treasure of folk wisdom, and his taste for old music transformed the monotony of the road into moments of joy. His company brought a new dimension to my journeys, filling the silence with laughter and reflections. Rodrigo's sudden passing left a palpable void, not only in our family but also in my daily routine. Returning to work after the mourning period was an emotional challenge. Every mile traveled was a painful reminder of his absence. It was in this context of loss and longing that the first signs of something extraordinary began to manifest, subtly altering the texture of my everyday reality. At first, they were occurrences so small that they could easily be dismissed as memory lapses or tricks of a tired trucker's mind. Radio stations inexplicably changed, tuning to Rodrigo's favorite songs. The passenger seat, which I always left, in a specific position, appeared adjusted differently, as if someone had been sitting there. Even more intriguing was the familiar aroma of tobacco that occasionally filled the cabin. Even though I didn't smoke and the windows were closed, I tried to rationalize these events as manifestations of my fatigue or the deep longing I felt. After all, the human mind is capable of creating convincing illusions when subjected to stress and loneliness. However, as time passed, the incidents became increasingly difficult to ignore or explain. The sensation of an invisible presence by my side grew, becoming almost tangible at certain moments of the journey. In moments of distraction, or when fatigue threatened to overcome my vigilance, I experienced the distinct sensation of a touch on my shoulder. It was as if someone was alerting me, keeping me attentive to the dangers of the road. These interventions, however inexplicable they might be, seemed to have a clear purpose: to ensure my safety. The familiarity of these gestures reminded me of the way Rodrigo used to alert me during our trips together. The pinnacle of these supernatural experiences occurred during a night trip to the northern part of the country. Exhausted after uninterrupted hours at the wheel, I felt a firm and unmistakable touch on my arm. I awoke from my torpor to find myself facing the headlights of a vehicle coming in my direction. By a thread, I managed to swerve, avoiding a collision that would certainly have been fatal. Trembling and with my heart racing, I stopped on the shoulder to compose myself. It was then that I noticed something on the fogged window on the passenger side. A message written in Rodrigo's unmistakable handwriting. "Be careful, son." This incident marked a turning point in my perception of these inexplicable occurrences. I could no longer deny the extraordinary nature of what I was experiencing. The interventions, always aimed at my safety and well-being, seemed an extension of the care and concern that Rodrigo had always shown in life. Gradually, my initial fear and confusion transformed into reluctant acceptance and then into gratitude. I realized that in some mysterious way, the connection we shared transcended the barriers of death, manifesting in ways that defied my conventional understanding of reality. The supernatural experiences with Rodrigo's presence continued to occur, becoming an integral part of my life on the road. Over time, I learned to accept and even find comfort in these inexplicable manifestations. The cabin of my truck, once a space of solitude, transformed into a sanctuary shared between the world of the living and something beyond. I began to notice patterns in the occurrences, almost as if Rodrigo was developing a code to communicate with me. Once, during a particularly difficult trip through the Rocky Mountains, I faced severe weather conditions. The fog was dense, reducing visibility to almost zero. I was about to stop when I felt that familiar touch on my shoulder. Instinctively, I continued driving. Moments later, the fog briefly dissipated, revealing a dangerous ravine to my right. If I had stopped where I intended, I might have left the truck in a precarious position. That night, I was sure that Rodrigo was still fulfilling his promise to protect me. Rodrigo's interventions weren't always dramatic. Sometimes, they were small gestures that reminded me to take care of myself. On long trips, when I was about to exceed my limits, the radio would change to calm music, like a gentle reminder to take a break. Other times, I'd find water bottles in the glove compartment that I didn't remember putting there, always at the moments when I most needed hydration. As the months passed, I began to share my experiences with other truckers. To my surprise, I discovered that I wasn't alone. Many colleagues had their own stories of inexplicable events on the road, though few were as consistent and personal as mine. These conversations helped me further accept my new reality and made me wonder how many other secrets the roads held. One night I stopped at a remote gas station to rest. While having coffee, I noticed an elderly man watching me. He approached and without preamble said, "He's still with you, isn't he?" I was stunned. The man introduced himself as a local shaman and explained that some souls choose to remain close to their loved ones, especially when they feel their mission on Earth is not complete. His words brought a new perspective to my experiences with Rodrigo. Inspired by this conversation, I began to research more about paranormal phenomena and spiritual beliefs. I discovered that many cultures around the world have similar beliefs about the permanence of spirits and their ability to interact with the physical world. This quest for knowledge not only helped me better understand my experiences, but also expanded my worldview in ways I never thought possible. Over time, I realized that Rodrigo's presence was subtly changing. Direct interventions became less frequent, but I began to feel a more subtle guidance in my daily decisions. It was as if, instead of directly protecting me from dangers, Rodrigo was teaching me to be more aware and intuitive. I started trusting my instincts more, often avoiding problems before they even manifested. Today, 5 years after the beginning of these extraordinary experiences, my life as a trucker has gained a new dimension. The road is no longer just a path between 2 points, but a space of connection with something greater than ourselves. Each trip is an opportunity for growth and reflection. Rodrigo's presence, whether real or a product of my mind, has transformed my perception of life, death, and what exists between these two states. I continue my journey, no longer alone but accompanied by a presence that defies logic, yet fills my heart with peace and gratitude. I need to go home. My name is Michael Sanders. I'm 47 years old and I've been a truck driver for over 15 years. I know every curve, every rest stop, and every story of the American highways like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did, until that October dawn last year. I was making my usual route between Denver and Salt Lake City, a road I've traveled hundreds of times. It was around 2 in the morning, a moonless night, one of those where the truck's headlights seemed to be swallowed by the absolute darkness of the road. The radio kept failing on that stretch, so I continued in silence with only the rumble of the engine keeping me company. My wife always begs me not to take this schedule, says it's dangerous, that American highways have too many stories. But what can I do? The freight pays better at night, and with 2 kids in college, every dollar counts. Besides, I've always been a practical man, one who believes only in what he sees. At least that's how I was until that night. It was on a sharp curve just after mile marker 67 that my headlights illuminated a silhouette by the roadside. I instinctively slowed down, thinking it might be an animal, but soon realized it was a woman. She was standing with her arm extended in the universal gesture of someone hitchhiking. I confess I hesitated. In that region at that time, it's not common to see anyone, much less a woman alone. But something about the way she stood there, so vulnerable in the darkness, made me stop. Perhaps it was the father in me, thinking it could be my daughter in a desperate situation. I pulled the truck over a few yards ahead and watched in the rearview mirror as she approached. She walked slowly, almost dragging her feet. She wore a simple white blouse and a long skirt, clothes that seemed out of place on that deserted road. Her long black hair partially covered her face, but I could still tell she was young, probably no more than 25 years old. When I opened the passenger door, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The air around her seemed colder, as if she brought with her a cold current from the night. "Where are you headed?" I tried to sound casual as she climbed into the truck. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice almost a whisper. "I need to go home. My daughter is waiting." There was something strange about the way she spoke, as if each word required an immense effort. Her eyes, when I finally could see them under the weak light of the dashboard, seemed distant, lost somewhere that wasn't here. I offered her water, which she declined with a slight nod. I tried to make conversation as we got back on the road, asking her name, where she was from, why she was alone at that hour, but she responded only with monosyllables or remained silent. Normally I would have found this suspicious, maybe even threatening, but there was something about her presence that inspired more compassion than fear. She hugged herself as if she felt very cold, although the night was relatively mild for October. Every now and then she would look anxiously out the window, as if searching for something or someone in the darkness that rapidly passed by. After about 20 minutes of uncomfortable silence, I decided to turn on the radio again. To my surprise, it worked perfectly, playing an old American song that my grandmother used to sing. It was then that I noticed, from the corner of my eye, that the woman began to hum softly, accompanying the melody. Her voice was soft, almost ethereal, and for some reason it sent chills down my spine. "My daughter loves this song," she said suddenly, her voice a little firmer now. "I sing it to her every night before she goes to sleep." That was the longest sentence she had spoken since getting into the truck, and something about it made me feel a deep sadness. "How old is your daughter?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "5, she answered, and for the first time, a fragile smile appeared on her face. "She turned 5 last month. I promised I would be there, but—" Her voice faltered, and she went back to looking out the window. The silence that followed was different, laden with a melancholy that seemed to fill the entire cabin. I began to feel a weight in my chest, an inexplicable feeling that something wasn't right. The temperature gauge on the truck began to drop, even with the air conditioning turned off. My breath formed small clouds of condensation, as if we were in the middle of winter. About an hour after picking her up, I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance. My tank was half full, but I decided to stop anyway. I needed to stretch my legs, get some coffee, and to be honest, get out of that cabin that seemed increasingly oppressive. "I'm going to refuel and buy something for us to eat," I announced, looking at her. The woman just nodded, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I parked next to the fuel pump and turned off the engine. "I'll be back in a few minutes," I said, grabbing my wallet. Out of habit, I locked the truck door when I got out. It's something every trucker does instinctively, even at seemingly safe stops. While the attendant filled the tank, I went to the convenience store, bought 2 coffees and some pastries. I chatted briefly with the clerk, an elderly man who seemed surprised to see someone at that hour. "Be careful on the road, friend," he told me as I was leaving. "This stretch has many stories." I ignored the comment, thinking it was just typical conversation one has with truckers at roadside stops. When I returned to the truck, less than 10 minutes later, I opened the passenger door and froze. The seat was empty. I looked around confused, thinking that perhaps she had gotten out to go to the bathroom, but there was no one in sight. I called out for her, though I realized I didn't know her name. I asked the attendant if he had seen a woman get out of my truck, but he shook his head. "You arrived alone, sir," he said with certainty. I stood there holding the 2 coffees, feeling a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the early morning. How could she have gotten out? The doors were locked and I had the keys the whole time. The windows were too small for someone to pass through. Besides, why would she leave without saying anything, in the middle of nowhere, at that time of night? I went back to the truck and examined the seat where she had been. There was no sign that anyone had been there. No hair, no mark on the upholstery, nothing. The only unusual thing was the soft scent of flowers that seemed to permeate the fabric, a fragrance that wasn't there before and that I couldn't identify. I sat behind the wheel trying to understand what had happened when I noticed something on the dashboard. The digital clock read exactly 3:33 a.m. Disturbed, I continued my journey. I couldn't stop thinking about that mysterious woman and how she had disappeared from my locked truck. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it all. The fatigue of the road sometimes plays tricks on a trucker's mind. But the flower scent remained, and I knew it hadn't been my imagination. I arrived at a small roadside diner around 5 in the morning, one of those places that stays open 24 hours to serve truckers. I needed a strong coffee and some human company to dispel that strange feeling that wouldn't leave me. The place was almost empty, just an old trucker sitting at the counter and the middle-aged waitress serving coffee. I sat a few stools away from the other driver and ordered coffee and eggs. While I waited, I couldn't help mentioning the strange encounter to the waitress. I picked up a passenger on the road between Denver and Salt Lake City, a young woman, and she simply disappeared. From my locked truck when I stopped to refuel, the other trucker, who until then seemed oblivious to the conversation, turned to me with an expression that mixed surprise and recognition. "A young woman in a white blouse and long skirt, long black hair?" he asked, his hoarse voice breaking the silence of the diner. I felt my blood run cold. "Yes, exactly like that. How do you know?" The man, who I later found out was named Edward, took his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. After a few seconds of searching, he turned the screen toward me. It was a news article from a local newspaper dated 3 years ago. The headline read, "Young mother dies in hit and run on Denver-Salt Lake Highway." The photo showed the face of the woman who had been in my truck hours before. Her name was Lucy Vega, 23 years old. According to the report, she had been the victim of a hit and run by a driver who fled without providing assistance, exactly at mile marker 67, the same place where I had found her. The accident happened at 3:33 a.m., the same time that showed on my dashboard clock when I noticed her disappearance. The report mentioned that she left behind a 2-year-old daughter who would now be 5, the same age that the woman, or whatever it was, had mentioned. Today, a year after that strange night, I still regularly drive the route between Denver and Salt Lake City. I always slow down when passing mile marker 67, but I've never seen Lucy again. Sometimes I leave flowers at the place where she died, and occasionally I visit Marisol and Mrs. Carmen, bringing small gifts for the little girl. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully explain what happened that early morning, or if I want an explanation. Some mysteries are perhaps better when they remain mysteries. What I do know is that my view of the world has forever changed. American. Highways hold stories that go beyond our understanding, and some souls, like Lucy Vega's, need to complete one last journey before finding their rest. And if you're driving on the highway between Denver and Salt Lake City and see a young woman in a white blouse and long skirt hitchhiking in the middle of the night, perhaps you'll want to stop. Maybe you're exactly the person she's waiting for to help her get home. The captivity. I'm Eric, a 35-year-old American truck driver. 7 years ago, I decided to try my luck in Canada, attracted by the promise of good earnings and new experiences. At first, everything was going well. I quickly adapted to Canadian roads and made friends with other drivers. However, a series of terrifying events transformed my life into a nightmare from which I'm still trying to escape. It all began on a rainy night when I was making a delivery in a remote region of the country. Suddenly, I was approached by a group of armed men. I had no chance to react. They dragged me out of the truck, tied me up and threw me into a car. I spent hours in captivity, fearing the worst. When they finally released me on a deserted road, my truck had disappeared. Desperate, I reported the theft to the authorities. Surprisingly, 3 days later, I received a call informing me that my vehicle had been found abandoned. I rushed to recover it, relieved to have my livelihood back. However, upon inspecting the truck, I noticed something disturbing. There were dark stains inside the trailer that looked like dried blood. I tried to ignore this macabre detail and returned to work. But soon, I realized something was wrong. During trips, I began to hear strange sounds coming from the back of the truck. They were like muffled cries and desperate knocks. At first, I thought they were just noises from the engine or the cargo, but the sounds became clearer and more frequent with each trip. One night, while driving on a deserted road, the noises intensified to the point where they could no longer be ignored. I pulled over to the shoulder, gathering courage to investigate. When I opened the trailer doors, I was hit by a nauseating odor. There was nothing in there besides my usual cargo, but the smell of death was unmistakable. Terrified, I sought help from a local mechanic, pretending I was having problems with the vehicle. While he inspected the truck, I noticed his expression change. With a trembling voice, he told me he had found traces of blood and human tissue in hidden places in the trailer. He suggested I go to the police immediately. Reluctantly, but with no other option, I went to the police station. To my surprise, the officers seemed to already be aware of the situation. They interrogated me for hours, wanting to know about my movements in recent weeks. It was then that they revealed the terrible truth. My truck had been used to transport bodies of victims of organized crime. Since then, my life has become a living hell. Although I was released due to lack of evidence against me, I live constantly tormented. The sounds and smells persist, even after a deep cleaning of the vehicle. I can't sleep without being haunted by terrible nightmares. And worst of all, I have the constant feeling of being watched, both by criminals and by the authorities. The Beast. My name is Robert. I'm 38 years old and I'm an American truck driver who decided to try his luck in Canada 2 years ago. Attracted by the promise of better working conditions and higher salaries, I left my life in the United States behind. However, nothing could have prepared me for what I would face on the icy Canadian roads. My usual route crosses some of the most remote and inhospitable regions of the country. In winter, the roads become true survival challenges. Despite the risks, I've always prided myself on my ability to face these extreme conditions. Until that fateful January night, I was making a delivery to a small town in northern Ontario. The snow was falling heavily, reducing visibility to almost zero. I decided to stop at a gas station to wait for the storm to pass. That's when I met Jake, another trucker who was also waiting for the weather to improve. We talked for hours, sharing stories about our experiences on the roads. When the blizzard finally subsided, we decided to continue our journey together, for safety. It was almost 2 in the morning when we got back on the road. The dense forest bordered both sides of the track, creating an almost claustrophobic scenario. Suddenly, something crossed the road in front of us. Jake braked abruptly, almost causing a collision. We were paralyzed, trying to understand what we had seen. It was a huge figure, bipedal, covered in fur. For an instant, its eyes reflected the light from the headlights before disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Jake and I looked at each other incredulous. That couldn't be a bear or any other animal we knew. Trembling, we got out of the trucks to check for any damage. That's when we noticed the footprints in the snow. They were huge, easily twice the size of a normal human footprint. They went from the forest on one side of the road to the other side, where they disappeared among the trees. I took pictures with my cell phone, hardly believing what I was seeing. We decided to continue the journey, but the rest of the trip was tense. We couldn't stop talking about what we had witnessed. When we reached our destination, we reported the incident to the transportation company. To our surprise, we were met with a mix of seriousness and apprehension. A supervisor took us to a private room and made us sign confidentiality agreements before questioning us in detail about what had happened. In the days that followed, I noticed a change in the company's behavior. I was transferred to routes further south, away from the area where the incident occurred. I tried to contact Jake but found that he had been relocated to another branch. The photos I had taken of the mysterious footprints mysteriously disappeared from my cell phone. Today, months later, I still wonder about what really happened that night. The company's reactions, the imposed secrecy, and the quick change in our routes make me question if there's something bigger being covered up. I continue driving on Canadian roads, but now with a more attentive eye to the shadows between the trees, wondering if one day I'll find answers to the mystery I witnessed. On that winter night. The woman on the radio. My name is Ray Gutierrez. I'm 38 years old and I've been a truck driver for almost 2 decades. I know American roads like the back of my hand, from well-paved highways to dirt roads that wind through places you wouldn't even find on a map. In all this time, I've seen many strange things, been through tense situations, especially in the more dangerous areas of the country. But nothing, absolutely nothing compares to what happened to me exactly 1 year ago when I was crossing a remote region of West Virginia. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember perfectly because I had just delivered a load in Charleston and was heading back home to Louisville. I decided to take a shortcut that few truckers use, a secondary road that cuts through an area known for criminal activity. Normally I would avoid this route, but I was tired and wanted to get home for my youngest daughter's birthday the next day. The sun was already setting when I entered that road, and soon darkness took over the landscape. Only my truck's headlights illuminated the cracked asphalt ahead of me. Around 9 o'clock at night, I began to feel that loneliness that only those who have driven on deserted roads know. I turned on the radio to have some company, but in that region the reception was terrible. I could only tune into static on most frequencies. I kept changing stations, hoping to find some music, some voice, anything that would break the oppressive silence in the cabin. That's when, on one of the frequencies, the static suddenly diminished and a voice emerged through the speakers. It was a female voice, low and broken, as if the person was whispering with difficulty. At first I thought I had finally found a radio station, but I soon realized something was wrong. The voice didn't have the professional cadence of a broadcaster. It was urgent, desperate. "Please, can anyone hear me? I'm trapped." They brought me to an abandoned warehouse near the highway. I don't know how much time I have before they come back. I felt my body freeze instantly. This didn't seem like a normal broadcast, nor a radio drama or program. The woman continued, her voice trembling. "I'm somewhere in West Virginia. I can see the highway from the window. There's a large dead oak tree at the entrance. Please help me before they come back." I stopped the truck on the shoulder, my heart racing as I turned up the radio volume. The voice continued, increasingly anguished. "They said no one will find me here, that no one passes through this road. I'm tied to a chair. I managed to reach this old radio transmitter, but I don't know if it's working." I grabbed the microphone of my own radio and pressed the button to speak. "I hear you. I'm on the secondary road in West Virginia. Where exactly are you?" I waited, but only heard static in response. I tried again, louder this time. "Can you hear me? I'm on the road now." Nothing. The transmission seemed to be one way. The woman continued speaking as if she hadn't heard me. "The warehouse looks abandoned for years. There's a symbol painted on the wall. It looks like a red eagle. I think I hear a truck approaching. My God, they're coming back." The transmission was abruptly interrupted, leaving only the sound of static. I sat there paralyzed, trying to process what I had just heard. Could it be possible that someone was really in danger at that exact moment? I looked out the window into the darkness of the American night. This region of West Virginia was no place for solitary heroics. It was territory disputed by criminal gangs, where people disappeared without a trace. The sensible thing would be to continue my journey and report the incident to authorities in the next town. But something in that voice, in the genuine desperation it conveyed, prevented me from simply ignoring it. What if it was real? What if someone really needed help? I thought about my own daughter and what I would hope someone would do if she were in danger. I decided to continue driving, but with my eyes alert for any sign of an abandoned warehouse. With a dead oak tree at the entrance, the road wound through dark hills, practically deserted at that hour. After approximately 20 minutes, I spotted something in the distance, a twisted silhouette against the night sky that looked like a dead tree. I slowed down, feeling the tension growing in my muscles, and there it was, a huge, dry oak tree, its branches contorted like skeletal fingers, pointing to a dirt road that led off the main highway. The officer invited me to sit down and served a strong coffee while he explained. In 1992, Elena Foster, a young 26-year-old teacher, was kidnapped when returning home after teaching at a rural school. It was the beginning of the escalation of gang violence in the region, and Elena had the misfortune of witnessing something she shouldn't have. They took her to that abandoned warehouse, which at the time was used as a drug transfer point. For 3 days, she was tied to that chair, while her captors decided what to do with her. On the third day, October 17th, Elena managed to reach a radio transmitter that was on the table next to her. continued the officer, his voice low and monotonous, like someone who has told the same story many times. She managed to turn it on and transmit calls for help for almost half an hour, describing where she was, begging for help. A truck driver passing through the region picked up the transmission and alerted the authorities, but when we got there, he paused, taking a sip of coffee. We arrived too late. The gang members returned and found her with the radio. The rest, you can imagine. I remained silent, processing that information. But how is it possible that I heard that transmission today, 30 years later? The officer shrugged. I don't have a scientific explanation for that, sir. I just know that every year on the anniversary of her death, some truck driver shows up here reporting the same thing. Always on October 17th, always around 9 at night, always the same description. The desperate voice, the warehouse, the chair, the red eagle on the wall. And you never investigated this further? I asked, incredulous. The officer looked at me with an expression that mixed resignation and a hint of fear. Investigate what, exactly? A ghost? A radio transmission from 3 decades ago? This is a region where the living give us enough problems, Mr. Gutierrez. We don't have resources to deal with the dead, too. I spent the night in a small town hotel, unable to sleep, going over everything in my head. The next morning, before resuming my journey, I decided to stop at a small grocery store to buy water and some snacks. The owner of the establishment, an elderly gentleman, observed me with curiosity as I chose the items. You look tired, friend. Trouble on the road? I don't know why, but I ended up telling him about the transmission and my visit to the abandoned warehouse. To my surprise, he didn't seem shocked or skeptical. "Ah, you heard Eleanor," he said, as if speaking of an old acquaintance. "I knew her, you know. She was a good girl, taught my oldest grandson, intelligent, dedicated. She didn't deserve what happened to her." He paused, organizing some cans on a shelf. "They say her soul finds no rest because nobody answered her call for help that day. The truck driver who heard her transmission alerted the authorities, but didn't have the courage to go there himself. Maybe if someone had gone immediately. And those responsible, I asked, were they arrested?" The old man laughed without humor. "In those days? In this region? Of course not. Some were killed in disputes with other gangs over the years. Others are probably still around, older, perhaps even respectable now." He looked at me intensely. "But they say all those who were directly involved in Elena's death died in strange ways. Inexplicable accidents, mainly on the roads, mainly at night." I thanked him for the information and was about to leave when the old man held my arm. "You know what's strangest? That radio transmitter you saw in the warehouse, it wasn't there originally. It appeared a few years after her death. Nobody knows who put it there or why. And the chair always returns to the same place, even when vandals move it or try to take it away." I returned to my truck with a feeling of weight in my chest. I started the engine and resumed my journey to Louisville, thinking about Elena Foster and how her voice continued crossing the ether year after year, seeking the help that never arrived in time. I also thought about what the old man had said about those responsible for her death and the accidents on the roads. I arrived home in time for my daughter's birthday, as I had planned. As I watched her blow out the candles, surrounded by friends and family, I couldn't help thinking about the young teacher whose life was brutally interrupted. In the days that followed, I researched everything I could about Elena Foster. I found few records, a small newspaper note about her disappearance, another even smaller one about the discovery of her body. It was as if her story had been deliberately minimized, perhaps out of fear, perhaps due to the complicity of the authorities of the time with the gangs. A year has passed. I avoided routes through West Virginia when possible, especially in October, but fate has a peculiar sense of humor. A mechanical problem with my truck forced me to stop in Pine Ridge exactly on October 17th this year. While waiting for the mechanic to finish the repairs, I went to the small town cemetery. It wasn't difficult to find Elena's grave. It was the only one with fresh flowers in that older section. I left my own bouquet there too, and stood in silence for a moment. That night, when I got back on the road, I tuned my radio to the same frequency as the year before, exactly at 9 o'clock. There was only static. Part of me felt relief, part felt a strange disappointment. Perhaps Elena had finally found peace. Or perhaps, and this thought occurred to me as I passed the old dead oak tree, she knew that this time someone had really heard her call for help and gone there, even if 30 years too late. I never heard Elena Foster's transmission again, but whenever I pass through that road in West Virginia, I slow down near the dead oak tree. And sometimes when I'm driving alone in the early morning and the radio picks up only static, I can't help but think about how many other voices might be trying to reach someone through the ether. How many other calls for help cross American highways, echoing through time, waiting for someone to finally respond.